In many ways, NASCAR is an organization of contradictions. Tradition is a main ingredient, but they want the recipe for the future. They're an iconic American institution that everyone's heard of, but struggling to hold on to their relevance. Now more than ever, NASCAR needs to succeed if they want to survive the next decade. In some aspects, I think they're succeeding, and in others, they really need to get it together. How can golf, of all sports, help NASCAR? Turns out, they can learn a lot.
Hello, my name's Riley, and I'm a friend of the channel, and I'm also the artist that made the Donut Media mural. It's finally done after so many sleepless nights, snacks, Red Bulls, ups and downs, highs and lows. Now it's finally here, and I'm so excited you guys get to see it and have your own version of it as a sticker.
It's not going to be available for very long, so if you want it, I suggest you go to donutmedia.com right now and get you one.
I'll get straight to the point. NASCAR's biggest problem right now is finding the right balance between the organization's southern roots and achieving mainstream success. We'll talk about that first part later, but right now, let's focus on getting back in the mainstream. NASCAR enjoyed strong cultural influence from the late 60s to the mid-2000s, but it can't be denied that their cultural cachet has waned in the years since then. But something very fortuitous has fallen into NASCAR's lap. The kids think NASCAR is cool again, or that their shirts are at least. How many influencers and real celebrities have you seen rocking a vintage NASCAR tee in the last year? Probably a lot. NASCAR is in a good position to capitalize on this nostalgia. They need to turn the person who is a fan of wearing vintage Dale shirts with designer jeans into fans of the sport that made that shirt possible. So how do they do that? NASCAR's primary product for the fans is racing. It's simple. The better the racing, the better the product. The better the product, the more people want it. From 2013 to 2021, the stock cars driven on track were known as Gen 6 cars. The machines were far from the stock cars of the 50s, barely recognizable and nowhere near street legal. These Gen 6 cars had the most advanced aerodynamics in NASCAR's history, a great achievement for the sport, but terrible for racing. The cars may have been more capable, but they were harder to race. All the turbulent air caused by the better aerodynamics made it a whole lot harder to follow behind. When you can't follow the car in front, you can't race the car in front. This meant that for a few years after the Gen 6 car was introduced, racing was a little flat. Fast drivers would regularly build huge leads over the field, effectively running away with the win. That's not very fun to watch. So to solve the problem, NASCAR introduced an effective and controversial fix. Stage racing is exactly what it sounds like. Instead of doing a 300-lap race all in one go, the race is broken up into sections. For example, if a race is 300 laps, NASCAR might break it up into two 75-lap stages and a 150-lap finale. In between the stages are competition cautions, which give the teams time to do a pit stop. The thinking is that since the aerodynamics and other car factors can cause the field to spread out over the course of the race, these cautions bring the pack back together, making for closer racing. Stage racing was a bit of a band-aid for the bigger problem. NASCAR knew that something had to change. The new Gen 7 car debuted this year at the Clash of the Coliseum. If you're a regular Donut viewer, you probably already know a lot about this car. And if you aren't a regular viewer, go ahead and consider hitting that like and subscribe button. NASCAR's goal with the Gen 7 car is to solve the problems of Gen 6 while making stock car racing relevant to modern manufacturers. This car has modern suspension, large single lug wheels with lower profile tires, and dare I say, it actually looks like the cars they're supposed to be. The car also relies more on what's called ground effect, prioritizing a low pressure zone under the car to create aerodynamic grip that doesn't produce as much turbulence, making it easier to follow. But this is just one aspect of NASCAR facilitating successful racing. There are more factors. Let's define them. For a race to be good, there needs to be racing, and that means lead changes. If one driver is out in front the whole time, that's not interesting. So the higher the number of leaders in the race, the better. There also needs to be minimal mechanical failures on the part of the cars. Nobody wants to see a leader or challenger drop out of the race for something they had no control over. It's extremely anticlimactic. Since every team in NASCAR uses the same chassis and tires, performance parity needs to be a priority as well, so smaller teams have a decent chance against the big teams. Now, I'm not saying that every car needs to be completely equal. Teams that are better at setting up their cars should be rewarded for their efforts, but money should not be an outright shortcut to success. And along with parity, the racing needs to result in a healthy variety of race winners, as it's a lot less fun to watch something if you have a good idea of who's going to win. Just look at F1. And overall, the series needs a logical championship that still remains dramatic. We'll talk about that last part a little later. But so far, The Gen 7 car seems to deliver. It's hard to scientifically quantify if the racing really is better this year, but there's at least one source we can turn to. Jeff Gluck is a motorsports journalist, and every week he asks his Twitter followers if that weekend's NASCAR race was good. And if we compare the races that have happened so far this year to last year's, we can see that yes, the fans think the racing is better. A lot better, in fact. Atlanta was the worst race so far at the time of this recording, but it still pulled 18% better than the first Atlanta race of 2021. Now, it's worth mentioning that NASCAR will sometimes hit the same track later in the season, and in two of these 2021 return trips, Phoenix 2 and Atlanta 2, those did score better on Jeff's poll than the first races of this season. But I would guess that these events were considered better because they took place later in the season. They were playoff races and more was at stake than the earlier season races. So the racing is getting better, the Gen 7 car looks like it paid off. But does successful racing mean a successful business? Not entirely. How the heck does NASCAR make money anyway? Well, the money comes from the TV. While getting butts in seats is a big goal for NASCAR with in-person attendance set to improve this year, their most important revenue stream are their broadcasting contracts. Back in 2012, NASCAR made an 8-year deal with Fox for $2.4 billion, which was eventually extended for another $1.4 billion on top of that. In 2013, NASCAR made another deal with NBC for $4.4 billion. These deals will keep NASCAR in the air until 2024, at a price of $8.2 billion. According to this great article on The Drive by Jerry Perez, NASCAR also earns money through sanctioning fees and title sponsors for the series itself. For example, it cost Monster Energy $60 million to be the title sponsor of the Cup Series between 2016 and 2019. NASCAR earns even more money from title sponsorships of each of the races. Companies pay millions of dollars to sponsor an event, like the Quick Trip 250 presented by Jockey, made in America at Road America. All of this money keeps the NASCAR machine going, but the organization doesn't keep all of it. Of that broadcasting revenue, about 65% goes to the tracks, 25% to the teams, and just 10% for NASCAR itself. NASCAR's financial motivation to make racing more entertaining is obvious. The more people watch NASCAR, the more leverage they have when it comes time to negotiate the TV contracts. And a more expensive contract isn't necessarily a bad thing for the broadcasters either. Higher ratings means they can charge more money if you want to air a commercial during the race. And the more people watching a broadcast, the more people will see your ad. Better racing is a win-win-win for everybody, including the teams. According to Jimmy Johnson, TV viewers are everything to the sport as it stands right now. Tune-in numbers drive the sponsorship numbers. That obviously drives the purse and certainly the money on a given car that the driver shares. Even though it feels like less and less of the media we consume comes through broadcast TV, it's still a huge part of how NASCAR operates. This could be seen as a bad thing for the future of the company, as so many young people consume media through streaming services rather than cable, but again, we'll talk about that in a little bit. A surprising aspect of NASCAR's operation is that in-person attendance is not as big a deal as I previously thought. Because the tracks take such a large share of the TV revenue, they can afford to have years of low attendance, like 2020 where no one was allowed in the stands. But keep in mind, NASCAR does have a vested interest in getting people to the track, and that's because they now own a bunch of the places they race at. Back in 2019, NASCAR merged with the International Speedway Corporation, buying them out of a cool $2 billion. These are all the tracks the ISC owned and operated. There's a lot of them. Just because NASCAR might be benefiting from TV money going to some tracks they own, they still want to sell out every race on the calendar that they can. The fewer people that show up, the less facilities like concessions and other attractions are necessary, and less people who work at the track get paid, which can have a cascading effect through the community surrounding a racetrack. Nobody wants to see a racetrack close. So to improve in-person attendance and boost TV ratings, NASCAR must make itself not only America's biggest motorsport, but one of the biggest sports overall. So how do they do that? What does mainstream success look like? Well, I'll be honest, that's a little harder to answer. Drive to Survive is one of the biggest accomplishments in both documentary filmmaking and motorsports marketing in recent memory. Not only were they able to shoot, lay out, and edit a season's worth of racing into 10 episodes in just 3 months, but successfully convinced millions of people who had never watched F1 to become fans pretty much overnight. It's safe to say that this windfall of cultural relevance is the envy of the motorsports world. Every team owner out there saw Zach Brown playing hockey and thought to themselves, that should be me, dang it, I'm cool. With the Gen 7 car looking good and producing enthralling racing, this sort of media coverage is the next step NASCAR needs to take if it wants to reintroduce itself as America's motorsport. but a Netflix series won't fix everything overnight. NASCAR needs to make a concerted effort to pepper drivers all over pop culture. You might have seen this article and photo shoot from Vanity Fair. While it makes sense that drivers from a historically glamorous sport like F1 would participate in a fashion shoot, there's absolutely no reason NASCAR drivers couldn't do something like this either. I'm telling you, call up Vogue magazine, dress Chase Elliott and Ryan Blaney in some St. Laurent, and get it done, okay? I know that wouldn't really fit the grizzled image normally associated with stock car racing, but that's kind of the point. The Vanity F1 piece sent shockwaves through the F1 fandom in the week leading up to the Bahrain Grand Prix because it was so out of left field. That's called earned media, baby. It doesn't have to be photo shoots, okay? Just get the drivers in front of people. It's astounding to me that a NASCAR driver has never been on Hot Ones. That's a layup. Like I mentioned at the top, the public is primed and ready to like NASCAR again. People are dropping hundreds of dollars on vintage NASCAR gear. The aesthetic is cool and the racing is good. This is totally possible, but there's some speed bumps in the way, and a lot of them come from NASCAR itself. First, let's talk about the issues I have with the racing. I understand why NASCAR adopted stage racing, but I think it's time to start thinking about getting rid of it. If the season continues and the drivers are all having an easier time following each other and racing hard, there's little reason to bunch the cars up to manufacture drama. The tension will come naturally. Now, that's pretty easy for me to say, but I don't think getting rid of stage racing will be quick, since it's an easy way for NASCAR to guarantee a dramatic finish at every event, and that's what they want. NASCAR will have to find the right balance between organic competition and storybook final laps. I would actually argue that not every single race needs to be made into an epic nail-biter, because then legit epic nail-biters become less special, especially when there are 36 races scheduled for the year. My next gripe with the racing is NASCAR's championship system. In most racing series, like Formula 1 and IndyCar, drivers and teams earn points based on their performance, and at the end of the season, the points are tabulated with an overall winner determined. With this system, it's possible for drivers to have slow starts but gain momentum, or for a team to come out the gate guns blazing only to fall apart. Dominant drivers have a good chance of winning the title, even if they have a few off days. NASCAR works a little differently. They have a regular season and playoffs like stick and ball sports. If you win a race during the regular season, you qualify for the playoffs automatically. Then, over the course of 4 rounds consisting of 10 races, you need to outperform the other playoff drivers and stay above the cutoff line for each round. Each playoff driver starts the playoffs with 2,000 playoff points plus bonus points awarded for regular season performance. Then, the playoff points are reset in the next playoff round, plus playoff bonus points are added. This happens twice. If it sounds confusing, that's because it is. This is a recent development. Like stage racing, NASCAR adopted the playoffs to manufacture drama towards the end of the season. Let's take a look at 2020. Driver Kevin Harvick had the most wins, tied for the most top 5 finishes, and had 7 top 10s out of 36 races. He also finished 5th in the championship because of this playoff format. Eventual champ Chase Elliott only won 5 events that year. Tell me how this makes sense! Proponents of the playoff system will say it's good because once the playoffs begin, contending drivers need to be on top of their game for every race, which I'll admit is true. But I'll also say it's needlessly confusing, because it is. Now that the Gen 7 car produces good racing, I think NASCAR can start thinking about doing away with this weird playoff system. F1's epic battle between Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen last year proved that a traditional point system can still make for extremely tense championships. Alright. I think it's time to talk about golf. The PGA Tour probably isn't the first sport you'd think NASCAR could learn a thing or two from, but stick with me. The first thing I think they can borrow is golf's approach to athlete personas. The PGA doesn't play down rivalries or stifle the personalities of the players. I hate to say it, but NASCAR kinda does. How many times have you watched a race and seen the winner climb out of their car, the first thing out of their mouth is a monotone sentence thanking the sponsors? Come on guys, it's boring. Let's show some emotion here. Sure, the teams do get about 75% of their income from sponsors, I know, but I want some personality here. Golfers, on the other hand, are a little more animated, and I think I know why this is. Golf, historically, is a more gentlemanly game, whereas racers are mostly talented degenerates. Historically, golfers never had to be wrangled in or given media training, because they're mostly posh rich guys. Racers, on the other hand, did need media training, but I think over the years NASCAR overcorrected and muzzled some really interesting personalities. If NASCAR wants people to become fans, they need to let the drivers be themselves and express themselves. That's how you get heroes and heels and everything in between. And if you're someone who complains about Noah Gragson's personality, get a clue, dude, that he's exactly the kind of driver the sport needs right now. This next part is a smaller issue, but I really think NASCAR could do a better job on the YouTube side of things. Now, I will give them props for posting highlights on race day and more extended highlights after the race, but these videos are in blurry 720p at 30 frames per second, which comes off as frankly out of touch and doesn't cut it in 2022. Now when F1 is posting super crisp 1080p at 50 frames per second, it's sick. Looks awesome. When the fans you want to get are on YouTube and other video platforms, you need to make it a good experience. Which brings me to streaming. With NASCAR making so much dough off of the broadcasting rights, I don't think a streaming service like F1 TV is in the cards, at least not right now. According to NASCAR's Senior VP of Media and Productions, quote, "We couldn't do an agreement, at least in 2021, simply because of one, our fan base isn't there today, and two, the team sponsorship model is so dependent on sponsors of revenue. Those spots sell off of TV eyeballs, and if you're not selling off the TV eyeballs, then it compromises the economic model of our entire industry." This is a tough one because I know younger fans aren't going to sign up for cable just to watch NASCAR, but NASCAR also really needs that broadcast money. I don't have a solution for this one. It's complicated. So the only question left now is how does NASCAR balance their desire for new fans while still serving their base? The Southern fans that were there when the sport was born. Well, I think it's easy, really. You serve the core audience by making racing that's really good and authentic, because that's what the core wants to remember the sport as being. There might be detractors that don't like road courses or races at the Coliseum, but when it comes down to it, racing is simple. It's a battle, and if the battle is close, then the battle is good, and people will want to watch it. Thank you for watching. Whew. All right, like and subscribe, all that stuff, at Donut Media, at Nolan J. Sykes. Be kind. See you next time.